Nothing is easier than to denounce an evildoer. Nothing is more difficult than to understand him. Have you seen an evildoer? Have you experienced an evildoer? It seems like every month in the news we have all sorts of evildoers perpetrating rampages, doing bad things to innocent people. But this is not a new dynamic. Let me take you back 2,000 years to the days of King Herod, and where in his paranoia of losing his throne to a newborn king, he ordered the slaying of all baby boys and all young boys in and surrounding Bethlehem. This was known as Massacre of the Innocents, as depicted here in this famous Rubens masterpiece titled the same. Throughout the thousands of years, this threatscape continued, except there has been two distinct evolutionary changes since then. That is the technology of violence and the technology of information. But what has not changed over the thousands and thousands of years is that very dark human nature of targeted violence. This is what I deal with every day. This is what you've dealt with throughout your lives, whether you've consciously known it or not. You know what I mean. You felt it. You might not have words for it, but you've stepped into a room and something just doesn't feel right. And your body's telling you that there's an emerging threat to your safety. When someone is just off. I call this feeling screepy. When someone is scary and creepy, but you quite can't put your finger on it. It's just screepy. And many women are very much tuned in to this screepy alert, and it served you well. Like those times when you stood in a dimly lit hallway in front of an elevator, and that door opens up, and that screepy person is there, and you decide at that moment, I'm going to take a different elevator. At that blink of an instant, you have just performed a threat assessment. You've now come into my world, a world of people who make threats, a world of stalkers, of predators. But this is not just my world. It's also your world. There is no vaccination against an evildoer. This is where I strive, where I risk my life, where I cause distress for the people who care about me. I am a threat assessment professional, and the majority of my threat assessments are performed in the workplace, in the school place, in a home, also in the wild, during surveillance and protective services. This is where I do not strive for success. Rather, I strive for zero failure. There's a common belief amongst professional guardians, and that is, amateurs practice until they get it right. Professionals, we train until we can't get it wrong. In performing threat assessments, I am tasked with these fundamental questions. Is it bark or is it bite? Is it a non-credible threat or is it a credible threat? Is a person making a threat or do they pose to be a threat? And I believe that you can relate to these very same questions when that screepy alert goes off. As a part of what I do, at times I'm in court and I'm providing expert testimony about a person who has a threat potential of targeted violence upon someone else. And often enough, during cross-examination, I get this one particular question from opposing counsel, and it goes something like this. Dr. Tao, you stated that you're a clinical and forensic psychologist and that you specialize in threat assessments and threat management and that you have 20 years of experience. Isn't it true that with all of your years of education and experience, that you just cannot predict violence? You cannot predict violence in my client? And here's my response. Yes, you're absolutely correct. As a threat assessment professional of 20 years of experience, I cannot predict violence, nor am I here to do such. But what I can do is to identify risk factors and data-based behavioral trajectories to assess for a threat potential of targeted violence. Much like how a cardiologist, with all of his or her years of education and experience, cannot predict when the patient's going to have a heart attack. But what that cardiologist can do, though, is to identify risk factors and database behavioral trajectories to assess for the risk potential of a heart attack in the near future. That cardiologist can look at recent history of heart attacks, family medical history, blood labs, and from there, assess for that risk potential of a heart attack. And that's what I do as a threat assessment professional. And that I look at the data and your client's behaviors, and I've assessed him for his threat potential of targeted violence upon her, his intended victim. A side note, our technology is quite amazing these days. We have even the smallest of portable heart monitors, if you will. Too bad we don't have something like a Screepy monitor to notify us of a threat, right? During those meetings, or how about during those first dates? I think that would be ideal. Wouldn't it be great if we had something like an Unfitbit, right? Or how about an app on our iPhone, iScreepy, or something along those lines? Give it time. So, when talking about threats, we are tasked with the fundamental questions that involve this. How can we tell the difference between bark versus bite? Between those who make a threat versus those who pose to be a threat? Well, the good news is this. Those who pose to be a threat often show repeated patterns of behaviors. Targeted violence is not an event, it's a process. And it's in that process do those repeated behaviors emerge. Often in my travels, I come across various resources regarding threats, stalking, predators, etc. And I'll come across various lists or checklists, like a list of warning signs of workplace violence or warning behaviors of a violent person. Something like this that you see here. Now, there's a lot of information on that list right there, and certainly far too many words for a TED Talk slide. A person who feels like they've been treated unfairly, low self-esteem, substance abuse, depression, low accountability for their behaviors, feel that they have difficulties relating to others, unusual interest in weapons. At face value, this list looks really good, but in the real world, this is way too broad and captures way too many nonviolent people in the general population to have this to be really useful. For example, today here in our audience, how many people here can relate to many of the items here on this list? No, don't raise your hands. I don't need you freaking out the person next to you, right? Or should I rather say screeping out? So instead of a checklist, let's approach this by using a framework. People who pose to be a threat often show clusters of behaviors. They often show a narrowing of focus upon a target, ramping up of malicious behaviors, obsessions and fixations of some malicious theme. And so what I'd like to present to you is that very framework. And here is a framework to go ahead and capture those clusters of behaviors of a person with a threat potential. Threat posturing, preparatory behaviors, and rehearsal fantasies of targeted violence. Threat posturing is a communicated threat, direct, indirect, verbal, written, posted online. It can be physical through hostile, aggressive approach behaviors. There are quite a few people out there who say some pretty mean and nasty things, but they're not necessarily considered a credible threat. But when they cross a certain threshold, that threshold being that of specificity and targeting and methodology, we start concerning ourselves about a true threat. For example, he pissed me off so much, I could shoot him. Versus, he pissed me off so much, I could shoot him, and I know where he lives, I know when he's alone, and he better watch his back. Preparatory behaviors involves the investment of time and resources into some kind of malicious act. They're researching online how to build a bomb. They're going onto various social media sites and harvesting personal information of a target. They're stalking someone and looking for opportunistic situations to exploit. They're procuring supplies and weapons. When someone thinks or talks about harming someone, we see this as aspirational violence. But when someone is stalking or procuring weapons, we see this more as operational violence. This person has now escalated from talking to doing. Rehearsal fantasies involves obsessions and pathological fixations involving themes of malice, retribution, getting even. They incessantly talk about it, write about it, post about it online. They just cannot let it go. Their personality is consumed with all these injustices. Often we see these people as injustice collectors with narcissistic levels of entitlement and contempt. The presence of any one of these raises a concern for a threat potential. However, the presence of any two or all three of these not only raises a significant concern for threat potential, we now need to start thinking about threat management and safety planning. A side note about safety planning. Often when I'm dealing with people who are feeling threatened, they're told, go get a restraining order. But I don't hear about the other half of that equation. Restraining orders and safety planning go hand in hand, but I only hear about restraining orders, unfortunately. Safety planning is about minimizing or avoiding vulnerabilities and planning ahead on what you're going to do when he actually shows up. Because when he does show up, calling the police is not going to provide you with immediate safety. A restraining order is also considered a tactic and not a strategy. Disengaging the threat, being safe, those are strategies. Restraining order is just one tactic out of many strategies, or I should say many tactics out of one strategy. It becomes really important for us to understand the roles and the functions between strategies and tactics. Strategies without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Here we have this framework. A framework that helps us better understand, help us better identify a threat potential. I've used this framework quite often. It has served me well in my threat assessments. And what I'd like to do is invite you to also use the same framework when that squeaky alert goes off about someone or a situation, to help you better tell the difference between bark versus bite, and knowing the difference and knowing when a threat is really a threat. All that I've shared with you today is not just about threat potentials and safety. It's more about having a peace of mind in a complex world. It's more about empowering you with knowledge and clarity. I'd like to leave you with a closing thought. The best way to predict the future is to create it. And thank you.